So Cyberpunk 2077 has been one of the most fascinating game launches, not only in recent memory, but in my opinion, in video game history. It's been a roller coaster of emotions with this game, and we've seen things happen such as the game getting completely removed off of PSN, which it's still not back on, full refunds offered on all platforms, and of course much more. Now, I've cooled down on my Cyberpunk 2077 coverage because I thought the story was pretty much coming to an end and it was time to look forward to the future of this game. But several discoveries have been done very recently that just adds more fuel to this fire of a game known as Cyberpunk 2077. So today we're going to talk about why Cyberpunk 2077 is the biggest lie in video gaming history, how we got to this point, and why it ended up happening in the first place. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to like the video. But without any further ado, Cyberpunk 2077. What more can we really say? So let's start things off with the apology that happened earlier this week. Now, earlier this week, the co-founder of CD Projekt Red, whose name I will probably butcher, so we're just going to refer to him by his first name of Marcin, put out an apology video that honestly felt right out of a YouTuber scandal take, with all the normal tropes that come with these sorts of videos. You know, the types I'm talking about, the low voice, the teary looking eyes. I thought the video was honestly mostly fluff, and we'll talk about why this video was even done in the first place later on in this video, but a few things that stood out to me in this apology were the following. Marcin went on to say, "We have made it more difficult for ourselves by wanting to make the game look epic on PCs and then adjusting it to consoles, especially old gens. That was our core assumption, and things did not look super difficult at first. While we knew the hardware gap, ultimately, time has proven that we've underestimated the task." Now, if you followed my coverage of Cyberpunk 2077, you know that I take exception to this statement because of the simple fact that the game was supposed to launch on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One only in April of 2020, meaning that a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X were not even factored into this equation. These systems did not even have a release date. We weren't even sure if they were going to come out in 2020. So to sit there and say that, oh, you know, we knew there was a technological gap, we knew that there was a problem, but it's especially bad on older gen consoles. No, stop it. There is no older gen console at the time of the development of this game, especially when you look at the game's development cycle, which is a whole nother topic that we'll get into later on in this video. But just by saying things like that and blaming it on older hardware is just very disingenuous to me because it's sort of sweeping it under the rug. You're putting the blame on something else that you had full control over since the time that you announced the game. He then went on to sort of out the Q&A testers as saying that they weren't giving enough feedback based on things, which I find very ridiculous considering the fact that pretty much everyone who played this game on a console had bugs of varying different degrees. A simple boot up of the game on the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One S, it would clearly showcase that these issues are there, yet they somehow weren't discovered. You didn't notice that textures weren't loading in properly. You didn't notice that core missions in the story of the game were actually glitching to the point of where you would have to reload a previous save. You didn't notice that a lot of things that you promised to come out in the game weren't actually included in the game. How do you miss this sort of stuff? Now, yes, obviously bugs and things are worse on the quote-unquote older consoles, and things run a bit smoother on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, but even the PC version of the game has bugs, and people just sort of look past these bugs as being open world related bugs, which I can somewhat understand. Open world games do sort of tend to lend themselves to have more bugs than a standard linear experience is concerned, but still, many of these bugs that people are experiencing are just within the core game itself and not even necessarily just weird physics-based things. So it's very disingenuous to me to sort of blame the Q&A testers, the people who probably played this game a hell of a lot more than your developers did because they had to try and find all of these bugs and then to do nothing about them, to sort of rush the game out the door and then just make a simple apology video straight out of a YouTuber trope where guys, I messed up and I'm sorry. It's just a really hard road. Like, shut up. Shut your damn mouth. Next up, a very interesting discovery was made about the development of Cyberpunk 2077. Now, of course, this game was initially announced back in 2013, but allegedly the game's development didn't really start until 2016, which is when Adam Bodowski took over as the director of the game. And then they decided to sort of figure out what sort of game it was actually going to be, whether it was going to be a first person or a third-person experience that you would be playing this open world game in. So they announced this game very, very early without actually having anything done to the game in order to sort of drum up interest for this game, which I find absolutely fascinating, that they thought that they could make a competent open world game in what, 2 to 3 years if you didn't start development until 2016. Now, all of this information is coming to us from a new article done by Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, who doesn't like me. He still has me blocked on Twitter, but I will have the link to the Bloomberg article in the description box down below should you want to read it, because I'm a nice person and I am not petty. In Jason's expose of Cyberpunk 2077, he says, at E3 in June of 2019, CD Projekt Red announced that the game would come out on April 16th of 2020. Fans were elated, but internally, some members of the team could only scratch their heads, wondering how they could possibly finish the game by then. One person said they thought the date was a joke. Based on the team's progress, they expected the game to be Based on the team's progress, they expected the game to be ready in 2022. Developers created memes about the game getting delayed, making bets on when it would happen. So to sit there and announce the game in 2013, but not start work on it until 2016, and then at E3 2019, you say that the game is coming in April of 2020, just seems like that development cycle wasn't going to be long enough to make this epic open world adventure game. So why are we pushing so hard to announce things like this to the point of where your developers don't even believe that this is actually going to happen? It's a very interesting situation and something that we'll talk about a bit later on in the video, but I feel like it's setting up for this next main point, and this is where things just unravel very, very quickly for Cyberpunk 2077. And that is the fake demo. So at E3 2018, we got a presentation for Cyberpunk 2077 that I am actually showing off right now. In this demonstration, we got to take a look at Night City, see how things were going to work within this, see what the different things you could do, the different sorts of combat, the car mechanics, all sorts of fun things. But you know what? The entire demo was allegedly a fake thing. In Jason's report, he says that the demo was almost entirely fake according to Bloomberg sources. Since its code and features were so far from final, many of the elements shown in that demo, such as car ambushes, never came to fruition in the final product. So essentially what you saw was a vision of maybe what they wanted the game to be, but it wasn't necessarily indicative of what the game was actually going to be. And this is something that a lot of people have discovered, especially people who were following Cyberpunk 2077 very heavily. I know Beat 'em Ups Wood made a very epic video, a epic review video for Cyberpunk 2077, and he sort of showcased some of the things that were talked about that were going to be in this game that of course never came to fruition in this game. Make sure you guys check out his video after watching this one. A very well done review and very entertaining. But seriously, all three of these things combined, a sort of pseudo fake apology video, the development cycle of the game not starting until very recently, and then just expecting it to churn out a masterpiece, and of course the fact that there was a fake demo at E3 2018 just paints a horrible picture for CD Projekt Red and for Cyberpunk 2077. So the questions remain: how did we get into this situation with this game? How did this even happen with this game? And I'm not saying that these are necessarily factual, they're just based on my opinions, but I do have a couple theories of why this ended up happening. The first thing I think is the success of Witcher 3 essentially just got to the head of CD Projekt Red. CD Projekt Red wasn't necessarily a household name. Sure, the first Witcher game and The Witcher 2 were great games, but they weren't really a household name. They didn't really have this sort of lineage to them until The Witcher 3 came around, and then it got great press on consoles and PC, and everyone seemed to love CD Projekt Red for crafting an excellent game that is still very playable and very enjoyable today, whether you have a Nintendo Switch or a PC or an Xbox Series X. The Witcher 3 is an absolutely fantastic experience. There's great writing, there's great storytelling, there's tons of side missions. It really created and crafted a very interesting world. And I feel like the success of The Witcher 3 just got to their heads a little bit, and they sort of got an ego thinking, you know what, we're pretty untouchable in this open world game market right now. While Bethesda has fallen off a cliff, while Rockstar isn't making games, they're just releasing DLC for GTA 5 Online, we could easily become the people that people sort of gravitate towards when it comes to open world games. The second thing I think that played a factor into this was meeting the holiday of 2020 deadline. Obviously, they delayed the game from April of 2020 to holiday of 2020, but releasing it in holiday of 2020 was obviously a priority simply because of the fact that there was a pandemic, and there still is a pandemic, and people were stuck at home, and video game sales were absolutely astronomical. When you look at things like Animal Crossing, I think Animal Crossing on the Switch would have sold very well, but the added benefit of people being stuck at home and having nothing to do definitely helped sales of that. So because of that, they wanted to get this game out as quickly as possible to try and get as many sales as possible. Hype was at an all-time high, and it's almost like they felt like things were coming apart at the seams. People were starting to see some questionable things. Where was the console version of this game? Why hadn't the console versions of this game been shown off? And I felt like they felt pressure because of that they had to get this game out into the marketplace before more people started asking questions. My third theory is they honestly felt that they would not get caught. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you look at a lot of AAA games that are presented at E3 presentations and then released, there's usually a bit of a downgrade. Sometimes it's a substantial downgrade. Look at the original Watch Dogs, for instance, from Ubisoft. There was a huge downgrade with this game, but did that stop the game from coming out, getting decent review scores, selling decently enough to make it a whole series? No, not at all. So I feel like CD Projekt Red thought that Cyberpunk 2077 could sort of fall into that sort of gap, where maybe it's not as good as it initially thought it was going to be, but the bugs and things, maybe people wouldn't notice them, and maybe people would be accepting of the product that they got, even though it necessarily wasn't indicative of what they were promised, much like in the original Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs, like I said, went on to become a series and a franchise for Ubisoft that usually sells pretty decently. I honestly feel like CD Projekt Red thought that they could get away with this and then just patch the game at their leisure whenever people started noticing a lot of things that were going on in the game. And my fourth point kind of ties into my third point, but I do feel like it's worth mentioning on its own, and that is sort of the celebration of fixing games in the video game industry now. Something like the best ongoing game, that was of course an award at the Video Game Awards, should be regulated to games like Fortnite, free-to-play games, games that you're not asking people to invest money into at the start of it. You're saying, here's a base game, we're gonna add more stuff. If you want to buy some microtransactions, great. If not, that's fine, whatever, enjoy the game for what it is. With a game that you're being asked to purchase, though, a game like No Man's Sky, which actually won for Best Ongoing Game Award, you're basically telling companies that it's okay to put out a product that you're not unsure of. It's okay to put out a product that, you know what, has bugs, has glitches, as long as you fix them later. And obviously this is something that has been happening within the video game industry, but I feel like some people just really turn a blind eye to this and worry about the product and the state that they play the product in when they decide to play this product, not necessarily on day one related stuff, which I think is still a very important thing, because if I'm investing $60 into a game, I expect the game to actually perform how it was intended to perform. I expect the game to run and look like it was indicative of in trailers and in previous coverage of the game. Really though, the one thing I take away from this whole situation is CD Projekt Red is not your friend. These video game companies are not your friend. The only reason why CD Projekt Red made an apology video was because they had to. They got caught. They were losing money from shareholders and investors. They're getting lambasted all over the media and all over the internet for Cyberpunk 2077. So they had to say something. They didn't say this out of the goodness of their heart. They didn't do this out of the goodness of their soul. They just want to try and recoup as much money as possible because they're a business. They have shareholders. They have people to answer to. They want to make as much money as possible. So in order to try to save face, they do things like these apology videos, but they're hollow videos. You have to look past this sort of thing. And that's one thing that gamers kind of have a bad track record of doing, where it's a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. But people get fooled over and over again by these companies, and it just seems like we never kind of learn. So I really hope that this ends up being a learning experience for a lot of people, because Cyberpunk 2077 is the biggest lie in video game history. Hopefully other AAA companies will take take something away from this fiasco, see how bad this was, and then realize you might as well delay your game a little bit. Yeah, you're gonna piss off some people, but in the long run, it's going to be a lot better of an experience for you and your consumer base. So let me know what you think of the whole Cyberpunk 2077 situation in the comments section down below. Like I said, I really didn't plan on talking about this game much more until we started to see patches released. Obviously, the next gen patch isn't coming anytime soon, so I guess I won't be talking about it much more, but I just think it's the biggest lie that I've ever seen in video gaming history, and people need to talk about these things to sort of bring awareness to it. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. Like I said at the start, if you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out other videos on the channel as well, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.